Good morning. Welcome to the Municipality of Anchorage Community and Economic Development Committee meeting. Today is March 16th. I'm your chair, Kevin Cross. We'll go through and do assembly introductions. In the room we have
Joey Sweet.
And it looks like we're the two lone crusaders here today. And on the phone,
Robin Dern.
I heard Christopher Constance, Robin Dern, and other than Chris and Robin, anybody else on the phone?
I'm glad that you think my voice sounds like Chris, but no, it's Felix. Oh, I'm here too.
All right, Felix and Chris and Robin are on the phone. Fantastic. Any introductions to make people at the table here? Introduce yourselves for the record.
Scott Campbell, Chief of Inspections.
Tony Lyon, Planning Director. Don Hickle, Lead Structural.
Excellent. And we have Dean Gates from Assembly Legal. Okay. Call to order any unfinished business. We don't have anything other unfinished business, although I know that we've had a pretty full schedule.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
just quickly want to put a note on the timing of this committee. Somehow the time was shifted a half an hour, and which is fine to extend the committee meeting, but it now extends directly abutting to the the Enterprise Committee that meets downtown at City Hall. And so it creates a scheduling conflict, and hopefully in the future, if the committee needs to extend its time, it goes earlier rather than later on this date, because generally speaking, those committee meetings are pretty packed and have some substantive issues to manage. So just for the future, and hopefully everybody, when this meeting is done safely, hurries over to City Hall, because again, there's lots on that agenda.
Thank you, Chris. Yes. So out of interest of time, we'll try to keep it brief so that we can make the 11 o'clock utility enterprise meeting. I do know that we tried to accommodate a different room for better audio, because in the past the training room has very poor audio for recording, and makes it very difficult for people on the line to hear. So we went to a smaller room with slightly better audio for those who can't appear in person. But we'll iron out those technical difficulties. Worst case scenario, maybe we end up moving these back to the assembly chambers where everything is congruent. We have excellent audio. We have access to the YouTube streams. We have all the presentation materials. I know we've accommodated the building department in the past just because there's so many of you and this is kind of your hub. But if we can't get our audio timing and other things, maybe we just look at what our options are. But thank you, Mr. Constance.
Thank you.
So, unfinished business. There's nothing on the agenda for unfinished business, but I know that we've had several projects we've been dealing with. Does anybody from Development Services or again Assembly would like to bring up an unfinished business item that's not on the agenda that we can discuss briefly?
Mr. Chair, Constant here. I just will say that I would love to keep in that unfinished business category the 2-year marijuana licensing until we have an ordinance that is moving forward.
Excellent. Do we have an update regarding, Chris? I know you've been working on that. Is there any kind of update you'd like to give us, or have we made any progress since our last meeting regarding?
Yeah, it's really stuck in my desk right now because there's a question about how to implement it, like who gets to be 2 years versus the 1 year one-time renewal to the 2-year cycle. And so I will own that it's not moved yet and it's not introduced yet, but I just want to keep it on the agenda.
All right, thank you. Any other items under unfinished business before we move right into new business? All right, excellent. New business. Item 3A. I believe, Joey, that's you. Broadband and digital equity presentation.
Yeah. I am not in charge of this agenda item, actually, but
Okay.
I do know I spoke with some folks who got here a little early. Yeah.
Is that, that's over here? Oh, fantastic. Joey, I know that you had worked on it our last, I think it was Oversight Rules Committee, I think is where you brought that up. I don't remember where you had.
Must have been somebody else.
Oh, was it you? Oh, I'm thinking your facial recognition.
It's all
I'm
technology.
conflating.
Yeah.
Conflating two different items. Fantastic. Excellent. Broadband and digital equity presentation. Please come up to the table if you can. Introduce yourself loud and clearly in the mic for the public record, and then we can begin. What's that?
No.
So, hi everyone. My name is Jeff Baird. I'm Chief of Staff at Rasmussen Foundation, and this is my colleague Rachel Callander. First of all, thank you for the time on the agenda today. We are really excited to tell you a little bit about a project Rasmussen Foundation is working on with the state of Alaska. I was going to provide just a brief overview, and my colleague Rachel is going to kind of jump into has a few slides that she's going to go over. But first, as many of you probably know, the state of Alaska is set to receive hundreds of millions of dollars to build out broadband infrastructure across the state. But before they do that, the feds are requiring the state to conduct really thorough conversations with populations that would normally have been left out of this process. We're talking about groups like veterans, seniors, low income, people experiencing disabilities. All in all, about 80% of Alaska falls into one of these populations. So we were asked by the state if we would be willing to assist with this project. And we are now working with the state and about 11 different nonprofits who work with these population groups to conduct what we're calling listening sessions. And through our nonprofit partners, we're reaching out to these groups to understand both access barriers and barriers to fully utilizing the broadband. Now, some of these are going to be obvious, like cost or it's not available, but the end product will be put into a plan that the state is responsible for, and it is a precursor to this other infrastructure package that is the money that will be used to build out the infrastructure. So what we are asking today is, first of all, we want to make you aware of this effort, and second, if we're just looking for opportunities to partner, and again, with the ultimate goal of putting forward the best product possible, both with understanding these barriers, but also really wanting Alaska to be as competitive as possible in securing these federal dollars to build out the infrastructure and addressing an issue that can be transformative for our state. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any immediate questions. And again, Rachel will go over some slides here.
I have a quick question.
Joy?
You said about conducting listening sessions.
Yes.
Have those already started, or they?
They have, yes. We've already conducted about 30 different listening sessions. We've probably got about 25 to 30 more. And there's still time. The deadlines for all of this happening have been super compressed. I'm sure you're familiar with this, the timing between when this opportunity was announced, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, and when all the steps in this process have to be completed are very condensed. And so the effort has begun, but there still is, we're right now kind of hitting our peak stride and having these community conversations. And so wanted to make sure that we touch our community partners and certainly the Assembly.
Thank you.
Okay, Rachel.
Through the chair, can I just request slide each time? Is that
Yeah,
fine?
absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent.
Thank you.
And please let me know if I've exceeded the time, and I will move quickly. So thank you. My name is Rachel Klander. Happy to be here with you all. As Jeff said, slide. We have already started this process, but are looking for all opportunities to engage with the hub communities that we've identified. As you likely know, I'm sure, as very engaged citizens of Anchorage, the State Broadband Office was launched recently as a new office with a new staff put into place to make sure that we maximize the opportunity and benefits with the federal dollars coming to each state under this broadband innovation investment effort with the federal government. Slide. The broadband initiative, Jeff already covered, so I'll skip that slide. Oh,
So let me just say one thing. Rasmussen Foundation was involved. Our board said, look, there's all this federal money that's coming in. Is there any way that we can be helpful in moving this process and helping the state capture as much money as possible? And so last February, our board said explore it. We did an extensive outreach at that time with partners across the state who said, yes, I think Rasmussen Foundation could be helpful. They allocated $3 million to supplement any efforts to make this outreach as extensive as possible. And that's why Rasmussen Foundation is involved. The mission of this assignment, which was to reach and listen to Alaskans, aligned with Rasmussen Foundation's mission of providing grants and helping communities across the state. And of course, a lot of our work is impacted by poor broadband. For instance, a big core area of Rasmussen Foundation is healthcare in rural Alaska. That impacts our way of impacting those communities. So that's why Rasmussen Foundation is involved in broadband. Okay.
Slide, please. So the Broadband Initiative goals, I'll blow through these quickly, is to provide all Alaskans with access to high-speed broadband, affordable prices, equitable and transparent process, as in how is that implemented, how is the infrastructure built out. That engages communities, results in strong government structures that ensure programmatic goals and benefits. Slide. So digital equity, I know when I first came into this project, I said, what the heck is that? That's fine. I'm originally from Cordova, and I'm proud to now live in Onahoe in Rogers Park. But I know back home where I come from, broadband, was miles away from Anchorage. And I'm sure that there are areas in Anchorage where people struggle. Affordability is a major piece. So digital equity is the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation. This, of course, as you know, was exacerbated and highlighted during COVID, depending on people's work situations and economic situations. Slide. The Digital Equity Act, a federal act that was passed, provides digital skills training, improves online accessibility, empowers rural communities. Slide, please. And this planning will lead to implementation. So again, I mentioned the new upstart of the State Broadband Office. So every state will identify the barriers to digital equity and strategies to overcome those barriers. That is part of the project we're here presenting on today. NTIA will then distribute digital equity capacity grants through states and national competitive grants. And I want to share that the experts we're consulting with have estimated that once the plan is submitted by the state of Alaska, there's on the table for Alaska to receive somewhere in the ballpark of $400 to $550 million for the state. So that's why we really want to make sure we're maximizing our abilities here. Next slide. As I mentioned, 4 to 550 available for Alaska Broadband. Next slide. The covered populations that Jeff mentioned that we are very focused on and would love feedback from the City of Anchorage and the Assembly on is how to ensure that we're not leaving important stakeholders or groups out within these 8 covered populations. Again, that is low-income individuals, at or below the 150% of the poverty line, individuals over the age of 60, incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, language barriers, the BIPOC community, and rural Alaskans. Next slide, please. The Digital Equity Plan will include a statewide vision for digital equity framework, literacy innovation programs, tech-related apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, which I think could be interesting for the City of Anchorage, integration with the state's upcoming economic development strategies, and action steps to implement the Digital Equity Plan, which is sort of a plan within the plan, within the larger state plan. Next slide, please.
And Rachel, can I just pause
Yep.
1 second there? So just to make it clear, Rasmussen Foundation is focused on this digital equity component. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure dollars that I was talking about earlier, that's a separate grant process. The digital equity work, the plan that's created out of this work is part of this other grant process, the infrastructure grant process, actually be inputted into that. So they're different grant pots, but they're synonymous in that they inform, one informs the other and is an essential part of the other part of the application.
And so this slide sort of highlights how those work together and what's within the larger plan. The State Digital Equity Plan, as Jeff mentioned, the Tribal Digital Equity Plan, which if you haven't met with her yet, Melissa Kukesh is who has been named as the tribal liaison for the state broadband office. The state broadband planning, and then all of that sort of culminates into this 5-year broadband action plan, which is where we really want to see that sweet spot of $400 to $550 million come through for Alaska. Next slide, please. And I guess I'll also mention, in terms of what's on the table nationally, just so you have that figure, is $42.45 billion in terms of this investment nationally. The planning process, so listening and understanding, that means outreach to those 8 populations we've covered, data collection and analysis. There are many experts working on that right now to support the larger state plan, other planning efforts, consideration, so strategies that respond to identified needs and gaps, consulting with the Digital Equity Working Group, which was recently stood up, and then, of course, reflection for this larger plan, drafting and receiving public comment. There will be a public comment process that starts in several months, and then preparing for the implementation efforts. Next slide, please. Going to your point, Mr. Sweet, these are some of the statewide communication efforts as a part of this initiative. So listening sessions with those key populations, both in person and virtual, public presentations like we're doing today, but we certainly would love to be dispatched to other groups that you felt would be appropriate in the city. The public comment process, which is forthcoming. Of course, we have our hand in social media awareness, email, and other medias, local advertisements and PSAs, and partnering with community anchor institutions, which we would also love your feedback on at any point. Next slide, please. So what do we want the listening sessions piece to look like? Approximately, or at least, 48 public meetings, traveling to meet with those covered populations. This is roughly running through this spring, but maybe pushed a bit further, started in October, and attendance at regularly scheduled events and meetings so that we can really hit those populations. Next slide, please. We are moving into the engagement tour phase of the Digital Equity Initiative piece, where we will be traveling, a whole group, including nonprofit leaders. We'll be traveling to at least 22 hub communities in 2023. So those are identified here. Next slide, please. And a required element of the plan is also an asset inventory. And so this has been in the works for many months now, which includes very technical expert consultants in the field of broadband, where they're taking a very holistic asset inventory of the entire state to make sure.
In other words, so like before they invest in a bunch of money and broadband, you got to understand what is available right now. And so that actually doesn't exist in one spot right now. So we are also leading the effort in terms of figuring out a process to capture this information, so it'll be part of, again, this digital equity plan, what exists, to help identify gaps.
To also make you aware, which this correlates a little bit with this asset inventory, there are, of course, natural players and entities in Anchorage that should be aware of a survey that exists, and we can provide this to the Assembly so that you have it, and also receive your feedback for dissemination. But this survey is a bit more technical in nature and is meant to help supplement or better inform this asset inventory. So think utilities and other entities that maybe support utilities, people who are well aware of this work on the ground, and we really want to make sure we don't miss anything in that inventory that will help provide the plans. Next slide, please. And so this is more for how communities can help, but I guess I'll cover it anyhow. So are there convenings we can join to get digital equity input? Absolutely. I think for this meeting, I'd more so be welcoming your feedback in terms of any gaps you might see in terms of our stakeholder and partners list. Covered populations in the community that may be difficult to reach sort of plays into that same feedback ask. And then if you have any specific thoughts on digital equity in Anchorage, to make sure that we are well aware. Next slide, please. This is our contact information, but I want to make sure that we're available for any questions before we wrap up this part of your agenda. Thank you so much.
Excellent. I have Robin Dern in the queue. Start with Robin, and we'll go around if anybody has any additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering if any of the focus will be directly related to the impact on students and children, both the negative and the positive, because I wanted to know if there's a plan with regard to how we're going to be proactive in educating and modeling for them so that the benefits of digital equality are realized, but that all the unintentional consequences may be able to be at least somewhat eradicated before we get started with regard to access to social media, inappropriate content, the potential for bullying, sexual exploitation, and other internet crimes against children. And I know there are a lot of grants available through the Office of Juvenile Justice, but I'm just wondering, because they're not a particular focus group, has this come into conversation, and is there anywhere where this demographic is going to get the attention it deserves in the conversation? Thank you.
Yeah, Robin, thank you for the question. I appreciate that. So the information can be collected in a couple of different ways, including with including with connecting with subject matter experts in a particular field. And so yes, we will be engaging the school district. That's as one example, but so that is part of the strategy. I just want to pivot. You mentioned things like educational materials. Those are things that have already come up in the listening sessions that we've already conducted, and that communities are concerned if you give someone a new tool without training and resources on what to be aware of, that there's potential danger with that. So we've already started developing materials that we can bring on in the second half of this kind of statewide listening tour to address some of those things and make them available in the community. We have a website we're creating where those resources will be as well. So we have a couple of different ways we are addressing that. And again, starting with your direct question, was connecting with subject matter experts in that field to make sure it's part of the plan.
And if I can follow up, this is Rachel, quickly about our outreach. We have been doing presentations to city councils and assemblies around the state specific to the hub community list that we've identified. And the sort of next batch, if you will, of scheduled virtual and in-person meetings, our goal is school district leaders. We really hope to be able to interface appropriately as well with teachers who are more hands-on with students and understand and identify gaps there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any additional questions? Mr. Gates.
Yes, thanks. Dean Gates, City Council. I'm just curious. I guess this is probably more related to the infrastructure than the digital equity, but have you identified, or I guess that's something some musicians are for to identify, any issues with, I guess, our municipal code for Anchorage, and we have our Title 21 telecommunications facilities section for uses, and we have our zoning districts. We have a specific chapters for Goodwood and Chugiak Eagle River. Those are all more outlying areas, and I just wonder if you've identified, I guess, any barriers in expanding, I guess, that infrastructure to those areas with the municipal code. And maybe not now, but as you go along, you might, I guess, want to see if there's anything that we hope to change.
So right now, this is all about listening, and that's the so if like this is an example of the things that we've learned about through conversations and even put on our radar. I think the foundation is coming from this as a realization that we are not a subject matter expert on this field, and what allowed us to have a space in this area is that connection with the groups that we're trying to hear from through our nonprofit relationships, and we are just going about it listening. So from your specific issue, I'm not sure we've addressed that yet, But that's something that could be flushed out in the types of conversation with community leaders that's saying, hey, this should be on your radar. We want to know about that so we can document it. It may or may not end up in a plan. It may or may not end up in another one of the buckets related to broadband infrastructure. But if we don't know about it, we can't make that determination.
Quick follow-up as well, and I'm not sure if this is directly on point to what you're asking, but I was just on a phone call yesterday with a colleague who's also working day in and day out on this effort, who updated me about her meetings with some of the statewide and local telecom leaders and other utility leaders. And so they are looped in and basically sending their own internal membership alerts and opportunities for how they can collaborate, not just with our initiative that's running through the Rasmussen Foundation on Equity, but also the state broadband office. So I think that people are eagerly trying to cover all bases in terms of the very natural partners for this asset inventory and any upgrades that need to happen with the funds available, meaning major utilities and telecom and otherwise.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. I guess my only question or concern is if we're using federal dollars in order, and imagine it's with some sort of partnership with private development because, our telecommunication companies are the 900-pound gorilla in providing these services, that if we're using federal dollars to create a public service, then who has domain over those? Because they'll probably either be an extension or utilized through them. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't want to see something where federal dollars build transponders, we utilize GCI, AT&T, or whoever it is, but then they reap the benefits or they reap the profits from those. You know what I mean? So curious on what that relationship would look like, because I don't imagine that, we will obviously be needing to use their expertise in this matter. And then Dean Gates asked the other question I had, which was just, listen, this is development services, so identifying any code restrictions or what that looks like as far as where we need to put that infrastructure, what that needs to look like, and are there any unintentional or restrictions that complicate that? We need to know in advance because it takes some time to adjust code. Okay. And so you may have money in the dream, but if we don't know what the problem is, it might take some time to get through this process.
Mm-hmm. That's great feedback. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't see anybody else in the queue. So seeing that, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Appreciate
for having
the
us.
All right, discussion regarding structural collapses. Thanks, Ross.
Yep, I'm Ross Knopfsinger, Engineering Services Manager for the Development Services Department, acting building official. So in the last few weeks, we've seen 6 or 7 structural failures that were all involved truss failures. And the type of trusses we're talking about are wood trusses with metal gang nail plates. And some of these failures definitely involve a design flaw that Scott Gruen here, structural engineer with BBFM Engineers, is going to talk about. But some of these failures may have failed for other reasons. One of the failures we found was definitely a wood rot failure. The trusses were, the heels were just completely rotten. And I think I'll turn it over to Scott and he can get into the particulars about the design flaw that we're seeing.
My name is Scott Gruen, Gruhn. I'm a lifelong Anchorageite, and I've been a structural engineer since 1991, working currently for BBFM Engineers, where I'm a principal. Before I begin, Ross, was the rot confirmed to be at the Fashion Pact building?
No. We're in contact with the owner of that. As soon as they can start lifting the debris so that we can see under the roof and see the trusses, we're not going to know for that one.
Where did you confirm?
The rot was confirmed at Sand Lake Auto, which was over in the Midtown area.
Okay.
And it was an interesting deal because we're looking at the built, I don't know, 70s, 80s-ish building, but it was originally designed to have rigid insulation on the roof deck. And when it was constructed, they changed it and they put bad insulation on the ceiling and created a cavity that needed to be vented, and they never vented it. But the rot was, it looks like, primarily caused by roof leakage over many years that just was not addressed through maintenance.
Thanks.
Yep.
New information for me. Maybe we'll start with going up to the directory for the Salvation Army. I thought I had a photo there of the Salvation Army. Let me take a look there. Yeah, up top right. So the type of truss that has been commonly failing, this building, I took a photo of this a couple years ago. This is a floor truss, not a roof truss like it's been collapsing, and this one did not collapse, but you can see that there is a shear failure already instigated in the next picture. There's a blow up of the second truss in there, and you can see what happens. This is a gang nail plate that connects trusses. There's one on each side of each connection in each truss. And you can see that a crack developed above this. This is indicative of what we call a shear failure. Shear is not maybe understood widely among non-engineers, but think of it as comparable to bending. If you can bend a bolt, and you can imagine it curves as you bend it. If you shear a bolt, you have a flat fracture plate. This is a shear failure in wood. And the problem with it is that the truss is strong because of all of its triangles until it gets to the very end of the truss, and at which point it delivers all of its load to just the top cord. So all of the load from the truss is now delivered just to a 2x6. And this truss may be 30, 40 feet long, and a 2x6 is not strong enough in shear to support that much weight. Sometimes, if we go to the Alaska Fish and Game directory, sometimes you will see a full height plate right there. You see this is a roof truss at Alaska Fish and Game, and the plywood you see up top is what keeps you from falling through the roof if you're walking up above. The wall is on the left, and you can see there's a full height or nearly full height steel plate directly above the wall. That does not connect any members of the truss. That is simply there intended to stop any splitting that might occur. However, that's not always effective. As you could tell with our Salvation Army truss, the crack extended to the right, not to the left, above the shear plate. So there is a belief in the truss design community that the gang nail plates will stop the cracks from forming. We have seen failures where they have been in place. So we're, in fact, if you look at our CrossFit directory, there's one of those plates that's designed to stop the cracking. If you go to, I'm sorry, I said CrossFit. I meant Fashion Pact. There's one of the plates present that was designed to stop the cracking at Fashion Pact. If you double click on that, the top image, if you zoom in really closely, you can see a web member that has been fastened to the truss has come loose during the collapse. This is not the cause of the collapse. The collapse cause was further to the south. But you can see that there is a plate directly over the wall that was supporting the trusses. And that did not stop what was likely, in this case, to have been a shear failure. It's the same kind of truss we've seen fail at Fashion Pact, CrossFit, Palmer Library, probably, Abbott Loop Community Church in 2012, a number of warehouses that I've visited over the decades. This is an inherent weakness in this type of truss. It's inherent to trusses that are hung from their top cords because these trusses simply overload that top cord in shear right at the very end of the truss where they have the most shear. Now I want to pause here and say that is the typical cause of failure that we've seen in gang nail truss buildings over the decades. That's the one cause that's caused most things. Now, as Ross mentioned, we've also seen other causes. We've seen rot. If you go to the Dowling Road directory, you'll see another cause. You can have poor construction, quality transmission on Dowling Road. That's the second to the upper right. So if you just look at maybe the first, let's go to the second image. Here you can see that the truss members are very long, and they're 2x members. And because they're so long, they require bracing if they're in compression. And the vertical ones will be in compression because of the layout of the truss. And those are tall enough, the tallest few are tall enough that the building code would not give us any allowable compression in those unless they are braced. So typically when a truss manufacturer provides their software, someone who runs the software will get a result that says these members must be braced, the bracing will be by others. That was clearly not enforced on this project. It was never installed. Not sure that it was designed. I don't know that that was the cause of collapse, but it is a weakness in the design. If you zoom in on that left visible steel plate at the top cord, so go over farther to the left, zoom way in on that, yes, right there. You'll see that we've got a plate that, let's say it's adequately sized, and it's really attached to that top cord, but it's hanging on to those web members by its fingertips. So again, this is faulty fabrication. The first problem we saw in this truss was faulty installation. Now this is faulty fabrication, and it just wasn't inspected, wasn't noticed, and this may have been the cause of collapse because there's so little grab on this. Now realize that this truss is the one that's stood. It happens to be over a supporting wall, I believe. But this is not the typical cause of collapse that we're seeing. These are weaknesses that should be noticed, should be found during construction, corrected during construction from this point forward. There are many buildings that may have something similar to this that we don't know about in town, but it's not an inherent weakness in this type of truss. Typically, gabled trusses like this will perform well. That's why we're not issuing any concerns about residential construction, because typically a residence will have gang nail trusses that are gabled, and they are not putting all of their load into shear at the end like a top hung cord truss would. So let me show you one other exception that proves the rule. And this one I don't have a photo of with me, but this is of the Pied Piper building, which had not a collapse, but they had two trusses fail and sag, and they've got them shored up and they're fixing them. Pied Piper had one truss fail. It looks like the cause was a large knot in a vertical web member. And so I think it was vertical. And so it fractured. It actually split into horizontal split in the web member, and it just broke. That happened to be near the middle of the truss, and so it sagged rather than having a catastrophic sudden shear failure. It sagged because now this is governed by bending. Bending is more forgiving than shear failures. Additionally, the next truss over had a plate break loose from the connection, so that the web members nearby ripped loose from the top cord. I presented it as if the knot failed first, causing the second truss to fail. It's also possible that the truss connection broke loose first, causing the knot to break. But again, those are specific issues that are not inherent to any kind of truss. Those are simply exceptions that prove the rule. The rule being that the trusses that are most of concern are the ones that deliver all of their load to the top cord just shy of where it is supported by a wall or beam. So that's the problem. And the next obvious question would be, can it be fixed? And what I want to address with the rest of the talk is simply the top cord hung trusses. And right now we believe we have a method that could fix them at a reasonable cost, several tens of thousands of dollars for a large warehouse. But it would not require taking down of ceilings, would not require taking down of sprinklers and ductwork and piping, electrical. So the issue there is the solution falls outside of what has been approved in our building code. It would need to be tested. I've contacted Dr. Scott Hamill of the University of Alaska Anchorage, and he can test that or some other solutions this summer and have an answer to us by late summer, possibly early fall. The cost of that testing would be, he estimates, around $15,000. I say $15,000 or $20,000 because we don't know what we don't know. At this point, it may be possible to get the Structural Engineers Association of Alaska to pony up for some of that. If we can do that, it would be helpful for us to know in advance if the municipality of Anchorage could fund half of that, for example. And if not, then not sure how we go forward from here. So there is a technical way that is likely to be shown that it could fix the problem at a reasonable cost relative to the value of the building. The next question would be, does the municipality of Anchorage want to step in and mandate this? The municipality of Anchorage already has mandates in I believe it's in the building code as adopted, or possibly in the policies of building safety. When the municipality when a building has a new roof put on with new insulation added, there is a requirement for a structural review of that building to make sure it's strong enough to support the additional weight of snow if the previous insulation value was relatively low, R20 or less, and if that insulation value will be increased by more than 30%, I believe it is. So if those parameters are the case, then the municipality already requires structural review of the roof structure to prove that the building is safe for the additional loads. So as part of that, the Muni could, by ordinance or by adoption of a future building code, could require that any re-roof of a top-hung truss would have to have a retrofit. likely this retrofits that's been tested, because it's very difficult to get other retrofits to work. California, I know, has a mandatory retrofit. I don't know what triggers their retrofits, but I would suggest that Anchorage public safety would be improved if we did establish a mandatory retrofit. That would be triggered by either a re-roof or by a sale of a building. In that case, in that way, we could improve the public safety of the structures in Alaska. I've said a lot. Are there any questions?
I have Randy Salt on the line. He has a question. Randy?
Yeah, it's kind of a simple question, I think, but I assume this would be something that a building inspector would look at during construction, and not something that we're currently maybe have oversight or lack of oversight on.
During construction, we would have both municipal inspectors on any job and likely special inspectors that are hired by the owner or design team. So for current buildings and future buildings, yes, we would have inspectors. This type of structure is still being built. There is a Truss Plate Institute, to give you maybe a little more information than we might want to get into, that will assert that the trusses that we've been looking at do have 2,500 pounds of shear capacity, which is enough for most of these trusses, if that last gang nail plate comes up to within 2 inches of the bottom of the plywood deck. However, you've already seen a crack directly above a truss that was about 2 inches down from that location, and so it doesn't give me as a structural engineer a lot of confidence in that result. So I think at this point we need something more than simply inspectors when we're looking at these top-hung wood trusses.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead and announce who you are.
Chris Shooting, private consultant. Can you go back to the example that you gave where the insulation value is changing? So older building, less efficient insulation as part of a re-roof, pulling it out, putting in better stuff, and that'll kick in a structural review. Is that because the newer insulation will add that additional weight, or is it that the building will insulate better, therefore the snow load actually goes up because it's not melting from an inefficient heat escape?
It's the latter.
Okay.
The purpose of this requirement in our municipality is that when we have had a historically performing building that has had just minimal amounts of snow because it loses a lot of heat through the roof, then if we go to improve the insulation dramatically so that it will hold substantially more snow, we don't know that building will hold the more snow unless we do a structural review of it. There's another requirement as well with respect to snow drifts. Uniform snow is one issue, and then drifting snow near a higher roof or a tall parapet wall, those are other issues too. And Ross, you can speak a little bit better to the requirements than I.
Yeah, through the chair. So we had this policy for years that if the roof R value was less than 30 and you increase the R value by more than 30%, you had to do a structural check. Well, we got a lot of blowback by the roofing industry. But we got that requirement adopted into the code. It actually became regulation in the last code cycle, I believe. And then there was more blowback from the roofing industry. And so an ordinance went through in 21, I believe, where they put a qualifier on it, where that only applies if the building was built prior to 1970 now, is the way it reads. However, just this week, I got a call from a contractor about a roof. It's a pre-engineered metal building, I mean, it's a metal building, metal roof and everything, 1972 construction. They put 5 inches of polyiso cyanurate insulation on top of the roof, which is about an R30, right? And I think I don't know how it all went down at the permit counter, but we never required a structural review on it. Of course, it was 72 or whatever. Well, now reportedly, the roof had a bunch of snow on it from this winter, and the roof was sagging so much that they could see the drop ceiling inside the building deflecting. And so they've got all the snow off the roof now, and they're going to do a structural analysis of it. But there's a really good chance that the structural analysis is going to show that this roof cannot support 40 pounds per square foot of snow. And now we've insulated it to the point where the snow it used to have 2.5 inches of fiberglass, which is about an R9. Mm-hmm. So no snow remained on the roof, it just melted. And now it's holding snow and it's a problem. So that's what we're dealing with.
And this is, may I, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, yes.
Is this for flat roofs only, or?
Any type of roof.
Any type of roof. And is this for commercial construction only? Or
No.
just flat roof?
Residential, commercial, any roof, yep.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Yeah, I guess my thought on that is just understanding that the roofing community does not like being put in the part of being what they feel to be code enforcers. And also the requirements of an education to be a roofing contractor versus getting in, and do they recognize and can they identify structural roof issues they need to bring to your attention. So I think, I was going to say something, was there a year mandate? But you said 1970. Does that need to be amended, or is there any other training or education we provide to our roofing contractors so they know what to look for to bring those things to our attention ahead of time? And as far as a resale, if there was restrictions on a resale, meaning that it would, I guess you'd have to work with title companies to make sure that they would, just like they do with COSA. For instance, you can't record on a sale unless you have a COSA for a well and septic. Title company will hold up recording until you have something from the municipality. I guess you'd be looking at some sort of provision like that. Just interested how you enforce that outside of the voracious public education campaign. What have you found works? I guess as far as, have we ever seen something like this before, that we realized that there was a major design flaw and a significant structural component of a building, and then what worked in the past as far as remedying that situation?
I would say this is a first for me,
Okay.
where we've discovered a major design flaw, and I think it's a little more broad than that. I think we have an era of underbuilt truss construction. We've got the design flaw, for one thing, that he's documented, but we also have an era of roof trusses that were marginally designed, marginally constructed, right? And they're in an aging building stock, and so these trusses have been undergoing probably this kind of incremental, prolonged failure over a period of many years. Like, say, maybe the winter of 2012, they got a bunch of weight on them, and some of the trusses may have been compromised that winter, but they didn't collapse, right? And then we went several winters without subjecting them to significant load. But cyclical loading over time is basically kind of causing these marginally designed things to wear out, to probably put it in oversimplified terms. And I think that's why we're starting to see this more and more through time. When these failures occurred in the past, we never looked at it from the perspective that a pattern's occurring, maybe. But we are now, because, as Scott pointed out, that these shear failures result in catastrophic roof collapse. And that is just not acceptable, to expose the public to that level of risk. That's what we're dealing with.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Please.
You had asked about enforcement, and currently all re-roofs do go through a review by building safety. So if it were simply an ordinance that the municipality could pass, that any re-roof requires a an upgrade to any roof trusses that might be top hung, then that would be instigated without having to educate roofing contractors who, honestly, they're not experts in structural engineering. And as you get different people and firms moving into the state and out of the state, it's easy to lose institutional knowledge of the type that we've presented here today. So if we want to do a good job of making sure that suspect buildings are retrofitted so that they're safe, I think passing an ordinance so that building safety can enforce it would be the way to go.
So then the next question then comes, and if I may just follow up with that, not everybody in the private sector is awash in cash. So the question is this insured through insurance, or how do they pay for it? Because I would anticipate it's not a small invoice. And what I've discovered is an individual who can't afford to fix those items, then we fine them heavily. And then if they don't fix it within a certain amount of time, it's $500 a day or whatever that looks like. And then it's a snake that eats its own tail. And then it doesn't get resolved. The building, who knows what happens if it just spirals. But so then we got to look at if this is something that's major. What can we do in order to keep the costs of these repairs under control? If it is a structural, do we waive permit fees on it, but require the inspections just to make sure, because it's a health and life safety issue? I don't know what that looks like, but I would be very curious on how do we mitigate the costs to the building owner, because the building owners are assuming these were done correctly and they purchased it in good faith. They probably even required inspections, but even the inspectors didn't realize this was a design flaw or something that's inadequate. So now we have a bunch of building owners with very large buildings that need major roof, a small handful of which I imagine need some significant roof repairs. And how do they afford it? And so anytime we put these mandates in and we require these things, for what could potentially be an issue, my concern is the financial ramifications on them, and how do we assist with handling that burden? Any other thoughts?
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
With any sort of regulation, we're going to have to be very careful, obviously, how we word it. Because if we pin this on building owners that, when you do a roof replacement, you shall do this investigation and upgrade accordingly, I can see what'll happen is they'll stop. Their building will need a roof replacement, but they won't do it because of the money involved, and they'll just limp along, which could then create a water damage problem that's just another problem on top of the problem.
Yeah.
So obviously, we're going to have to put a lot of thought into whatever approach we take. A primary aspect of the approach is going to be public education, right? The municipality is going to have to completely rethink its snow removal guidance, because we've got this aging infrastructure that now we know that we're aware of. They cannot support design snow load. So,
yeah.
I mean, obviously snow removal is going to be the short-term solution, but it's not the long-term solution. In regards to the insurance company, I think we're going to find out relatively quickly what insurance companies are going to pay for and what they're not going to pay for, given the amount of collapses that we're seeing. And probably from the insurance company's perspective, it's cheaper to pay for an upgrade than to pay for the results of a collapse.
Yeah.
So,
Mr. Constance, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have some concern about this conversation about us not acting or acting in a less than robust manner because we're afraid of the cost it might cause building owners who then will act in a way that is outside of the guidance because they want to save money. This whole conversation is why people die and why roofs collapse. And I am very concerned that we should understand the nature of it, but we should certainly come up with a rational requirement to help people understand their liability, because this is a personal liability. Buyer beware. They own these buildings. We don't own these buildings. Unless we are owners of the buildings, then we have to do our own analysis and pay for it. And so I want us to be very, very cautious about putting out there a message that, well, we're not going to act as firmly as we could because we're afraid you're going to violate the code. if they do that, then they own that liability, and it's a disaster waiting to happen. This is a all hands on deck moment for us. We've had 4 roofs fall this winter alone. And so if we can recognize the problem, we have to put out a very clear resolution, in my opinion.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. I agree. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Yes, sir.
This is Don Hickel, lead structural inspector. Yesterday, we had a partial collapse at Planet Fitness at the Northway Mall, which sheared a 3-inch gas line and was dumping into the mall, which could have been a potential huge explosion. And we had a restaurant floor on a Zamarillo Mall building at the corner of Arctic and International, top cord hung truss, unventilated crawl space. All the gang plates and every floor truss are completely rusted through. It's going to be a major repair. I don't think you can save the trusses. It looks like there was plumbing drain line failures, grease trap failures. The whole crawl space is full of grease, and they are all commercial condos. And these people just bought the restaurant, and they're in there remodeling it.
Which restaurant was that again?
Used to be the Tofu House on the corner of International and Arctic.
Okay.
Now it's Heidi's Family Restaurant, and they're in there. They just put down all new flooring, and we had to post it no occupancy. It's too dangerous, and if the floor trusses fail, the exterior wall fails that's holding those up, which then the roof fails. It's a big domino.
Yep.
So the urgency of getting these repaired. I mean, it's a restaurant. How many people can you put in it? And kids.
I mean, other than looking at a flat roof building, I mean, from the exterior, I mean, it has to be an internal inspection where you get up in there to find out what kind of, because they didn't record which buildings use this kind of joist structure.
I would say every building built by Pete Zamarillo in the 80s, every building owner should have a structural engineer do a thorough assessment of the building and look above the grid, get in the crawl space, look at these floor trusses. It's only going to take one.
So if we can get with ADN and do something that's a large, to let the public know, then who do they call in order to have their building looked at? Is there a fee involved? Because I know that our code enforcement is already short-staffed, and I mean they're already. So I mean, I'm just looking at where do we find the army of individuals to deal with this once we bring it and we get it out there?
I think we do it just like we did the earthquake assessments.
Okay.
I mean, I've got structural inspectors that can spot a problem and then inform the building owner to get a structural engineer to make an assessment. Say, hey, you got a problem. But, and we can get, if it's really bad, we can post a notice of no occupancy and keep the public out until they do get a structural engineer up there to take a look. But I think that would be prudent to protect the public at this point.
Okay.
And we could, Ross, we could probably set something up like we did the earthquake assessments for these commercial building owners and don't charge them anything to get eyeballs on it, but we got to do something.
So given what you've seen, is this something maybe we would get the Office of Emergency Management involved and say, do some sort of help with their resources, do a press release, see what they would recommend to get the word out?
I'd leave that to Ross.
Well, we've already got the guidance out on the snow removal from the roof, and that hasn't changed. And that guidance is pretty specific and targeted because we know we have limited snow removal contractors and we want the snow removal contractors to focus on the buildings in most need. And so we really don't want to change that message, which what Don's referring to here is we found truss failures in a crawl space with excessive rot.
Yeah.
That's a little less urgent than the snow load issue in the roof trusses right now at this point in time.
Yes, sir. Mr. Constant, I still have you in the queue. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. So you just started getting to where my mind was, the OEM, Office of Emergency Management question. I wonder if there's any precedent for an intervention with FEMA on this. And I know FEMA doesn't do prevention, but maybe there's some cognate, and it certainly warrants a request to the state and the feds to help, because we probably what our first step to do other than emergency mitigation is get a kind of scope of the problem document so that we can start to quantify the need. And I don't know how we do that. That's something probably for the building department to help us grasp, is how do we take it to a kind of lot by lot catalog.
Yeah, that's a good point with FEMA. I mean, this is weather related. You could argue it's weather related that I situated a design flaw. And I'd be curious to see what we can do to come up with additional funding, not just for one, the cost and expense of the inspections, the manpower it'll take in order to identify them in a timely manner, and then whether it's potential loans or what that looks like, special financing for building owners so they can get them done. Just in the rare cases that they don't have insurance, will cover it. What kind of, because I think it's, if we're looking at public safety being the greatest concern, then how do we make sure those things are done? Excellent. So I'll have a conversation with the Office of Emergency Management. Any other thoughts, concerns before we move on? Obviously, this has been very informative. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Scott, for coming in. Oh,
sorry,
Chris,
just
over
as
here
a
by my corner.
just as a footnote to this conversation, the University of Alaska Anchorage, under Dr. Jen Schmidt, is conducting. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. It's called AURA, but in essence, it is how are communities, particularly urban communities like Anchorage, able to increase its resiliency in the face of climate change-related impacts, snow load, and particularly with our winters being extreme swings over the course of the winter and the increasing weight that's putting on roofs. This might be a valuable topic for that AURA discussion. It's unfortunately an all-day long session, but it's on Monday at UAA. I can send Mandy a link to the event, so people who are interested in perhaps this structural conversation would be appropriate for it. So just wanted to put that up.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on to the next topic? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we can combine C and D. These are items I brought up, vacant and abandoned real property rules and fines. This was something brought up by one of the community councils out in District 2, code enforcement, fees and fines. These kind of just fall into place. And just so that before you give your presentation, Scott, Scott, are you going to speak on this, or who's going to? Yeah. Okay. What we are looking for is just a better understanding of how particular fines are being issued. An example of one concern was there was a gentleman, just to kind of put things in perspective, a gentleman named Travis. He was military. He owner-occupied a fourplex for many years. He got PCS'd, went down to Texas, had a hot water heater failure, hired a mechanical contractor. That mechanical contractor failed to pull a permit. The property was fined. They were mailing the invoices to the property, although the tax records notified the owner was in Texas. It accumulated for a couple of years without him knowing, and in the end, he ended up having over a $250,000 lien against his property. So when he went to sell it, that showed up, it jeopardized, it cost a sale, it caused all kinds of problems because it doesn't say it's for a hot water heater permit, it just says lien from municipality of Anchorage on his title. It created all kinds of problems. And so it's like, gosh, this guy didn't pull a $170 permit for a hot water heater, and it ended up costing, and he hired a HVAC contractor. So I've got to look into how does that play out. It doesn't sound to me like there's any kind of caps on fines or anything when they start accruing daily, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that process of how you issue fines and how those are determined.
Well, we issue fines according to the municipal code, 15, 21, 23. I can't speak specifically on the property you're talking about, but most of the fines, so basically the reason why we're out there doing what we're doing is to make sure that the issues we have today, we don't face again in 40 years. I mean, we can all understand that some of the buildings that were built in the 70s and 80s, as Ross and Scott just talked about aren't built to code. That are not, or built. They were built to code at the time, but they're failing. Right? We're looking at an unprecedented time going on right now. So a lot of them are failing. They're not adequately engineered. They might not have been inspected in the past, built quality products, qualified labor. There's a number of things. They've been through years of earthquakes, water damage, heavy snow, and they're at the end of their lifespan. So as far as our fines and fees are concerned, we have to deal with every one of them independently, and we work them as a case individually. Vacant and abandoned buildings, of course, we have over 133, I believe, currently registered with the municipality. And we follow Title 15, vacant and abandoned building rules. We keep track of them through our database here, and we make sure that everybody's up to date. So I can't specifically speak to the one you're talking about.
And I guess my question is for a vacant and abandoned building, when a new property owner, the sale is triggered, when the property transfers. My understanding is that there can be some complications with the new owner getting that vacant and abandoned status removed.
No, I don't think so. I think if they pay their fines and fees, we remove the lien. Most of them are $100. They do accumulate over time if they're not paid, but.
And then if they accumulate to something in the thousands and thousands, depending on how long it's been sitting vacant, a new owner takes place, how is that negotiated down to a reasonable fee to incentivize getting the property safe and operating again and providing housing?
Well, we want to make sure that buildings don't sit vacant and don't rot and don't have maintenance issues. I mean, that's a big thing we're dealing with. We're dealing with maintenance issues all over because nobody's doing upkeep on their building. So I believe that's part of the reason why this vacant and abandoned was put into the code. I'm not sure it was done before I was here. So,
well, it makes sense. You want something becoming a deterrent and becoming an attractor for the unsavory elements.
We do have some pictures of what happens to vacant and abandoned buildings. If Manny wants to pull them up.
Oh, I'm very familiar. You know, yes, I'm very familiar, particularly during COVID when they weren't when they were releasing individuals. We had several properties that were getting continually broken into by the same handful of people.
And that's what happens, right?
You're getting fined for being vacant and abandoned, and you're like, if you would just keep the people in prison, they would quit instead of keep breaking into my property. It's the same 3-4 people again and again.
What we have right now is we have a lot of people that are sitting on these properties. They're not doing anything with them.
Yeah.
They get broken into. They get burned down. They become a public nuisance over and over and over again. The fines and fees, if people don't pay them, that accumulates. If they come back to us and there is a reason why, for instance, this gentleman didn't know, we talk to him, we listen to him, we come to a common ground with that person. If we realize that they didn't understand what they were into. But I think a lot of people do when they own these vacant and abandoned buildings. They know what they're getting into. And we're just following the code the way it's written.
So who is the individual that then negotiates, or is there it's not a board, who ultimately negotiates the fee?
I have never been involved with a negotiation on a vacant and abandoned building since I've been here.
Or not just vacant abandoned, let's say a permit fee.
Permit fees, if we have negotiations with permit fees, the building official, the development services director, and myself go to Bayman.
Through the chair, we don't negotiate permit fees. Permit fees are set in code.
I mean, non-permit, penalties.
Penalties? Yeah. So the way the code works is you can waive a fine for the first offense. But that's the only place the code recognizes the building official has latitude to waive fines, right? However, that being said, we get a property where these large fines you're talking about are the ones where they're like $100 a day fine, and the person doesn't respond to us for 2 years or whatever. Those are the ones that run up the huge these huge unrealistic fines. And generally, if they come in and they sit down and talk with us and they're ready to actually renovate the building and get it back on the market again and fix all the code violations, and they've hired a design team and they're submitting for a permit, we won't assess those fines. You know, they'll sit in place until we see follow through that they renovate the building, you know, get it livable again and get it back on the market. The objective of those is a tool to get these, and I'm pretty sure when the assembly came up with this ordinance on vacant and abandoned buildings, was the objective was, let's get they're mostly residential, let's get these buildings in a condition where they can be occupiable again, let's get them back on the market.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be working because whether they're owned by banks or whether they're owned by individuals, they seem to just sit for years. And sometimes they don't pay the vacant and abandoned building fee, and that's when they start running up the tab on those. And I don't think there's any latitude in 15 to forgive any of those charges.
And I'll build off that. Mrs. Robin Dern, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Cross. Thank you for the presentation. This is something I've been very interested in. I'm wondering, I think the code definitely failed to address disclosure, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, because I have talked to several people who had no idea when they purchased places that there were any liens, fines, or anything against properties that had been listed on the vacant and abandoned rolls. And then the second part of my question is whether you think there might be a better way to escalate fines or some sort of other process we might use to proactively encourage that these properties become developed properties. If it's anything that your department has thought about, or if it's something that you'd like for us as a group to think about. Thank you.
So just what, like Robin said, when something's marked vacant and abandoned, just to build off her question, do we report that to title companies, or is that just on the municipal website? I mean, how would an individual make sure or find out that is where it would? How do we make that information hard to miss?
Call.
Well, currently it goes on the vacant and abandoned buildings list, but we don't record on it at that point.
No.
We record on it when they don't pay, when they don't register and they don't pay.
All right.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. So make sure it's not a vacant or abandoned building. So let me talk to the MLS, and that is, for real estate professionals. If there's not something that we can do and amend the residential property transfer or just a transfer disclosure statement to include, because we already have sexual offenders, we have Department of Environmental Conservation to just make sure meth labs, chemical things, agricultural sites, a host of other items. They have a list of websites they encourage individuals to go to, which does now include searching for open permits as well. And so perhaps what we can do is under the open permit search, since that's common, I mean, would it be possible and how difficult would it be on the same page to say vacant and abandoned property? Can it show up underneath where we issue out the open permits or things that haven't been resolved? Because I think what's happening is individuals are going in there and there's all these different things they're looking at. It's just one more thing they didn't think to check. So how do we keep that in a uniform way when an individual goes, they can find out everything about a property? You know what I mean? Not only is that in a vacant abandoned status, is there fees attached to it, but are there any other open permits and what does that look like? And make it easy to recognize so that someone doesn't purchase it and then just realize, oh my gosh, I just bought a property. And those may not, because they haven't been paid, they may not show up on a title report, so it won't show up as a lien that needs to get paid at transfer. And now you have a new property and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this and how do I resolve this issue? Who went into it with good intentions to fix things up and make it nice. So perhaps we can look at something along that lines. Any thoughts or contributions? I know that we're running tight on time. Chris?
Let me just make a comment. So when we initially established the vacant building registry, an unintended consequence of making that information public is that it was a target for not great activity.
Okay.
We were advertising where to go. That's
All
why. And I don't see anybody from real estate here, but my recollection is that when we removed that list from public, that the way that it was accessed was by calling the real estate department, or I think in some cases Canada Development Services, and then inquiring about an address or a parcel ID to confirm it. I still think that's probably worth keeping in place, given the typical neighborhood concerns are about what happens at these vacant and abandoned properties, not that they are vacant necessarily. So anything we can do to keep people from taking advantage of those would be great. As a follow-on, though, I loved your idea about MLS and disclosure modifications and whether or not that can become standard practice. That would probably help a lot of homeowners who, and I don't know how many there are, but who unintentionally walk into a lien on a property due to unpaid fines for vacant or abandoned.
Yeah, particularly since I think a little over, around 85% of houses transfer using a real estate professional. So as long as they're doing that, we can wipe out a large part of the issue.
It's vacant land too.
Oh, on vacant land as well. Well, you know there's a land disclosure. The MLS does require a land disclosure. They didn't until about 3 years ago, but now they have.
Yeah, we've got notices of violation on vacant land. We have notices of violation on homes that are getting flipped. They get a new owner. The new owner comes down to get a deck permit, and here's a hold on the property because the house was remodeled without a permit. Now you got a new owner. The guy that did the remodel, he's down south, and they're stuck with it.
So what I can do is I can request a meeting with the MLS board because they have I think they have bi-weekly meetings, and I can get on their agenda. I can bring some of this stuff to their attention, and maybe we can make good headway just resolving it there with disclosures. The only other thing that I had was as far as fees and fines is that I understand that we go with the property owner, and you know. The analogy I had someone use that was fine. They hired a contractor. Again, that contractor, they were having issues with the contractor, and the property owner gets fined. And they're struggling to find contractors to fix what the first guy fixed. They're like, this analogy said that's like going to a doctor, and you have a hangnail. He cuts the thumb off the wrong hand, and so they find the guy who hired you. They find the patient. The guy's like, I still have a hand. I still have a hangnail, and now I have a hand with an amputated thumb, and you're finding me. And so how do we, but you go after the property owner who then has to take the contractor to court, and then we put the financial burden back on them, and it's just a nightmare for hiring the wrong contractor, which, is why it's important. But I mean, I'm just looking at our fines and fees, and when there's an indication that there's a bad acting contractor, what is your experience? Maybe you can speak to how that relationship is with the property owner, not being additionally overly punitive to someone who fell victim to a bad player, and how do we help people?
And that's the thing. We'll negotiate with that property owner, and a lot of these fines and fees that are assessed, we're willing to drop those so we can allow that person to do the work they need to be done adequately and professionally and to code. And that's where our stipulated agreements come in. We tend to use those as a way to help the property owner get through the process, and with the understanding that they fulfill all the things they need to fulfill with that process. And if they go through that process and they get everything corrected, then we negotiate those fees down. Our whole goal is to make sure that the landowner who had a contractor come in and do improper work and then run with their money, we want to make sure that landowner, we understand, we empathize with them. We want to make things right for their house.
So we kind of got two separate things here, and it can get confusing. We got building permitting, and we've got vacant and abandoned buildings. So, like on the building permitting side of the house, we do not transfer fines and fees onto a new property owner, right? We've got a situation right now where a guy owned a residential lot. He dumped a whole bunch of crap dirt material on it. We issued a notice that you need a fill and grade permit for this fill and grade operation you got going on. He tore down, threw away the notice, never responded to us. So this property has been assessing fines at $100 a day for many months now, and is up to $28,000 in fines. In our notice, we put the standard language that you shall not transfer this property until this is resolved. He sold it. It must have been a cash deal to an individual. The individual who bought it was not aware that this guy had been dumping all this material on there, not properly placing it, not properly compacting it, did not remove the organics. There's a bunch of organics in this material. So he bought this situation. We're obviously not transferring the $28,000 of fines to the new owner. But they still stick on the old owner, who no longer owns it.
So then, yeah, how do you assess other assets, or what is within your authority to do so?
Yeah, so that creates kind of a conundrum.
So, and yeah, which, because it was under a certain amount, I guess it doesn't show up as a lien, or at what point does it show up on the title?
We actually recorded on this title.
The guy just didn't pull a title report.
Yes.
Oh, well then, yeah, cash sale, so it didn't require a seller's title. Okay. Well, that regretfully for the owner, that's also why there's title insurance out there. That's that's one of those things where that seems not a wise decision to buy any form of real estate, including vacant land, without a title report. How do you know the gentleman actually even has the right to sell it? So, but okay. Well, yeah, there's always those outliers. And I got two people. And first, Dean, you had raised your hand. Dean, did you have a question? You probably have
yes, well, I was going to comment, but I think these guys covered the issue I was going to ask about. I worked in the Department of Law in the past and handled some cases related to code enforcement, building permits, and collections for fines and things like that. But as I understand it, and maybe that's still the case today, there usually are starting with a notice of violation with the deficiencies and asking for compliance. And if they fix it, no problem. But if they don't, they start with a 1-day fine and try to get compliance. A lot of this, I think, will be case by case. And if they still don't get compliance after talking to the owner, then they will sort of ratchet up to another level where you do 3 days of fines in a row, or 10 days. You have evidence of non-compliance for days in a row, but you're not doing you're fining me now and every day from now on. That's not really how it works. So I just wanted to make sure we don't have that misconception. But I haven't worked there in a long time, so I wonder if that's still sort of the way you approach things today, these kind of building permit issues and code compliance issues. And then I sort of wanted to ask, though, at what point do you guys now say we need to send this to the law department for enforcement, maybe taking it to court for enforcement order, enforcing their compliance orders or collections? And we've had to do that a couple of times in the past in the law department, and sometimes we were successful. We got one large payoff, $40,000, and the owner selling it and giving out. But that's not really the goal. Collecting money, the goal is compliance. But you have sort of some system where you have a point in time process that you refer to legal and have court action involved.
Yeah, we work each individual case, and we've referred things to law before, or legal, sorry, and it just depends on which case. So we try to deal with everything individually, so to speak.
Well, we've reached the end. I know that the phone just got cut off because they're starting at 11 o'clock utilities oversight. So I don't think we're any longer on the record. Or
we are, but the next meeting is calling in.
Oh, the next meeting's calling in. So, Robin, I know you had a question, but we're going to another meeting. If you want to email it in, I'll make sure it gets sent out, and then we'll try to get an answer on that. We had a full agenda today, and we try to move that. We'll try to be a little more comprehensive at the time in the future. But I really appreciate everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.